what I saw that really resonated for me was is so many young men addicted.
Welcome. I'd like to introduce and welcome to the show Tom Bresnahan. Thank you so much for being here today, Tom.
Sure, thank you, Laura. Great to be here.
I wanted to invite you on the show and have a conversation with you just based on obviously we have some overlap in who we know, who we work with, our colleagues and on social media, and just seeing some of the things that you put out into the world around the sphere of young men, teens and young 20s, young men in the world and what they're needing, what you offer. I just felt that that was a really important conversation to have. So I want to welcome you, but I also at the same time would love for you to just share with the audience, who are you and what do you want the audience to know about you?
Great. Well, thank you. So I do work with teen and 20s young men. That's kind of my area of focus. I also work with their parents. And for your audience, no cohort has fallen farther and faster in the last 30 years than teen and 20s young men. What you see in universities, two young women are graduating for every young man. In the workforce, the Gen Zs, the kids that are turning 12 to 27 this year, so there's 68 million of them, so 34 million boys, give or take. Um, in the workforce, the Gen Zs, 22 to 27, it's two-thirds girls, one-third boys. And then in family formation, relationships, you're seeing this a lot in the news and everything. Young women are not feeling like there's enough economically and emotionally viable young men for them to pair off with. So we're seeing marriage rates crater, birth rates crater, relationships. The young women are like, ugh, the young men are like, so it's really something that's affecting the culture. I have a teenage daughter, so um, sometimes people can think, well, I don't have a son, so it won't affect me. It,
Mm,
it will affect you, and real quickly, um, there's a Morgan Stanley study that was done a few years ago. You can Google it. It's the rise of the she economy, like economy. You
hmm
can look it
hmm
up. And the Fortune 1000 companies came to Morgan Stanley and said, look, we're seeing the demographics change. Women make 85% of all household purchases. They're not buying the stuff they've traditionally bought. What are we going to sell them? Morgan Stanley did this extensive study and came back and said by 2030, half of the women in the US between 25 and 49 will be single and childless. And a lot of them won't be happy about that. And so we're really seeing how that's going to affect the country and the culture going forward. And that's something
Right.
that I'm really interested in helping not only the young men and their parents, but young women as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And would you, I think there's so many changes happening, right? And that's just one area. And we have to remember that there are all these different impacts, right? Like you're talking about if women are single and they're making the majority of the money, that's going to be a different impact on the economy. It's going to be a different impact on how we all are interacting. Um, what I'd love for you to share with the audience what pulled you into this work, because this wasn't your first line of work. So what is it that really pulled you into doing this work?
Sure, sure. So it's a second career for me, even a third career. I was an actor in films and television for 20 years. Overlapping that, I worked in the fashion industry with my ex-wife. We had showrooms in New York, Dallas, and LA, and that was awesome. Um, but then when show business kind of didn't work out, I got into the family business, if you will. My mother and father were both very successful therapists for decades, almost 40 years each. And I had worked in addiction treatment a bit. I had some trouble with drugs and alcohol myself and had sponsored a lot of guys. I'd worked at a treatment center in Malibu that I helped start. I'd done tons of interventions. That was almost like a side gig when I was acting, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
things overlapping. And so I got into being, a therapist, a counselor, intervention leader, and all that. But what I saw that really resonated for me was so many young men addicted to screens, drugs, alcohol, vaping, pornography, all that. And it really hit me because I really struggled as a teen and young man myself with that stuff. So I just sort of saw this niche that really needed some attention, I felt, and something that I is really important to me. And I feel like I just really get what they're going through. And I also get what the parents are going through because I watch my parents, I'm the oldest of five, raise five children. And I also have, as I said, a teenager of my own. So it really felt like this thing where it was something needed in the world, and it was something that I felt really passionate about.
Did you early on, you mentioned both your parents were therapists. Early on, did you consider that as a career?
No, not
No. So
really.
it didn't enter in until later.
Yeah, I mean, I got out of college and Tom Cruise and all these guys, I was like, hey, I can do that, and I got into that and had some success. But again, once I was in my early 40s, it's if you're not a star, it's kind of over. So I realized I just better get out and figure something else out. So but
Okay, so now you're here. So I mean, and then you had a second career, and then now you've been doing this for quite a while. What would you say in the time that you've been doing this work? What have been the most significant changes that you have seen with, let's say, young men or young women?
Okay, great question. So, in the last 12 years that I've been doing this work, we've seen the Me Too era. Now, I was in Hollywood. I was in acting class with Ashley Judd when she had her meeting with Harvey Weinstein. And you really saw how young men were painted with this brush of being potential predators or abusers or all that based on what powerful men had done, a small amount of powerful
Mhm.
men. And that really hurt young men. You've also seen COVID, where the kids were just isolated at
Right.
home on screens. I really saw that affect
Mhm.
my own daughter.
Yeah.
So we've seen that. There's just been a lot of things that young men have had to struggle with. Again, where you've seen Title IX and the future is female and girl power and all that. Again, I have a daughter. That's great. But I always say when one sex loses, both lose. In other
Yeah,
words,
that gives me goosebumps because I think that it's really easy to jump on, even something you just said, it's really easy to jump on one of the, one aspect of it, but what that last thing that if one sex loses we all lose. I think that's really important because again, it's not isolated, right? It's
You're right,
it,
and it's not a zero sum thing. There's still it's getting better, but there's still something in the culture where if you're for young men or men, you're a misogynist or maybe like Andrew Tate or something, and you don't like women. It's not an either or. These are
right,
kids. These are teenagers, early 20s. Remember, we know their brain isn't fully developed
right,
till they're
right,
25. So it's
right.
like again, for me personally if my daughter, I mean, she already pretty much says she wants to be a mom and all that, she wants three children. So, in other words, I want her to have a pool of happy, successful, confident young men to choose a husband from,
Right.
ostensibly, right? 10,
Mhm.
whatever years from now. She's 17, 10, 15 years from now. It's not an either or. I'm for both sides. I think the advances that women made and getting a seat at the table that was needed, no doubt
Right,
about it,
right.
but it can't come at the expense of young men, and I feel like thankfully we're sort of pulling back towards the middle again
Mhm.
with that and really seeing how young men need our attention as well.
I only had a sister. I didn't have any brothers, and then I had two boys before I had a daughter. And I remember just having a really incredible sense of responsibility as a mom to boys is a very different, not better, not worse, you know, not one versus the other. But with the boys, I really felt like, hey, I want them to respect at the time, young, respect girls. I'm also very conscious about what they go through physiologically, what they or where they are emotionally, and really talking with them around what does it look like to be kind and good and respectful? And um, I found that I didn't have a whole lot of support in the community for that. I don't know if you see that with some of the parents you're working with, but it seemed like it was more of a black and white, do this, don't do that, instead of a conversation around what might you do if you're in this scenario with a girl, or what might you do if you're in this scenario at school? So can you speak to that at all? Just
I can. So my daughter reports, and you see these stories in the media where she'll be like, Dad, a girl will be talking or passing notes or on her phone, and the teacher will go, Stop that, Jenny, or whatever. A boy will do the same thing and he'll get sent to the office. And
mm,
so you don't,
mm,
the sexes are different. Again, I'm not going to get into that whole thing, but they're different. Okay. Let's just stop with that craziness. Okay. They're different. Their brains are different. We know that. Boys have testosterone pumping through their system.
mm,
It's much more difficult for them to sit still for 7 or 8 hours a day than it is for girls. We know that. They learn more with physical and sort of
right.
touch and all that. And there really hasn't been an accommodation for that. And they're treated sometimes as defective girls. And
Mm,
again, that's hurting us even if
mm,
you have a daughter.
right.
You know, their brains develop slower. An
Hmm.
18-year-old girl and an 18-year-old boy, he's got more of like a 16-year-old brain as far
Right.
as brain development. In
Right.
fact, my colleague Richard Reeves, who wrote the book of Boys and Men, and
Hmm.
he started the American Institute on Boys and Men, great guy, doing a lot of great work out there. He actually spoke before Congress and said, we should redshirt all boys as maybe a solution to why there's two-thirds young women and only one-third young men now in colleges.
I didn't realize that statistic.
And then two girls graduate for every one boy because boys drop out more. So again,
Yeah.
women don't marry down. And don't, I'm not putting women down to your audience, but women don't typically marry down. A woman with a college degree or a PhD is not going to marry an electrician. So usually. So we really have to remedy this situation going forward for that generation and their happiness. Again, the Gen Zs, there's 68 million of them, the kids turning 12 to 27 this year. They're going to be running the show 20 years from now, you know? So we really
Right.
need to support them.
So when you think, when you talk about, or when you think about, or when you work, when you in this area of support them, what would you, and look, I understand because there's so many different levels, so many different dimensions, and everyone is so different. But if you were to tease out a couple themes that the audience members could kind of take with them about ways that we can support or think about supporting all of the people, in that younger generation, what would you suggest?
Okay, well, that's a pretty big question, but I'll
Yeah.
do my best to address it. So, a few things you have to understand when you're looking at this situation, if you do have a young man in your life, or again, even a young woman. Um, and this goes back to my experience in addiction treatment. Most of what's going on with them falls under the heading of excessive habits or addictive behaviors. And that's true for us adults as well, but particularly in that demographic, 15 to 25, okay? It's excessive habits and addictive behaviors. It's being stuck on screens. You know, for boys and girls, it's
Mhm.
social media. For boys, it's porn, it's vaping, it's weed, it's alcohol, it's other drugs, it's getting in trouble, it's defying authority, it's doing all that stuff where you have to understand that those are the things you must get under control as a parent. You must teach them. And what happens with girls and boys is the psychiatric industry, the psychology industry, all that, that's sort of set up in this assembly line almost, if you will, where it's label and medicate, label and medicate. What's
Mhm.
wrong with them? Give them this label, give them this medication. And you're not, a big part of my work is understanding those underlying issues, understand what's going on, look at those excessive habits and addictive behaviors. There's nothing wrong with him. He just has to stop doing these things. And then the
Well, I'm
parent,
sure there are a lot of parents who would agree with you.
yeah, and then there's a way to do it. In other words,
Yeah.
parents also have to look at what were, because I work with the parents too. A lot of
Right,
times I'll say to the young guy, "Don't worry, I'm gonna squeeze Bob and Mary, okay? Don't worry, but let's figure out what you're doing, okay? Because mom and dad a lot, they're not in agreement on how we should deal with our son. They both had childhoods and they saw what their parents did and how they were disciplined
right,
and the structure of so there's so many things going on here that you have to unpack. That's why I always say to parents, sending your son to this weekly 50-minute hour where he's just in his head talking never gets any results. You have to give him
so
actions,
true.
accountability,
Yeah,
things to do. You have to check in with mom and dad. What's going on in the household? What's going on in his environment? Deal with the breakdowns that he's going to have.
right,
That's why I have that in between session check-ins and tech support. You have to deal with things in real time and go, hey,
right.
dude, what was that about? You had your assignment this week. What happened? What do you mean? Well, your mom texted me and said, he's like, oh, okay, dude. That's how you really change them and get into action.
Right. Yeah,
Instead of being in their head about once a week having a talk where they usually forget about it the next day.
right. It's
Like,
gone. It's gone.
right. Like, honey, what happened in therapy yesterday? I
I don't
don't
know.
know. Well, what'd you talk about? I don't know.
It's
So,
long gone by that point.
yeah.
It's interesting when early on when I did when I was training for my psychology license, degree and license, I did some work with children, so younger, more like 6, 7, 8, 9. And I was working at a place where I didn't set the rules, so I was in that particular system learning. I just remember so many times the kid getting dropped off at this age, which to me is like, wait, there's a whole lot more going on. And is there a time and place for that? I do agree there is, because sometimes there's some expression, there are sometimes some things that they do need to be with someone without their parents. But I just remember so young and thinking, this this kid this kid is fine. There's just a system. There's a system problem that we need to talk. We need to have everyone in the system being a part of the solution, which is one of the things I really respect in what you're doing with the teens and young adults. It's the system, and then there's also an integration of, it's not just over there in therapy, it's integrated into the daily life with, it sounds like, text messages. I
Yeah,
other ways.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're like, fix my kid, and then I say to parents, well, if I don't look at what's going on in the home and what you guys are doing, and then parents will be like, nah, what do you mean? I'm like, look, we all make mistakes. I know all this stuff and I make mistakes. We've all
Yeah.
made them. So,
I've been told by my kids, why am I making the mistakes? Because I have my degree.
yeah. And
I'm like, I'm
so,
not perfect, so I'm doing my best.
exactly. And the parents feel relief. They're like, okay, we have to change the environment. We have to change how we're getting along, whether the parents are together or not.
Right.
Half the probably half the young men out there are growing up without a dad in the home, and or the parents are divorced, so they're going maybe back and forth between
Right.
two households. So I always tell the parents, whether you're together or not, you have to get on the same page, because that's
Mhm.
what's going to benefit him, or like I said, your daughter. I am not married to my daughter's mother anymore, but we made a very conscious choice to put on our big boy and big girl pants and just be friendly, loving. We get together, we do family things together because that's what's best for our daughter. Okay.
Right.
We
Right.
got divorced 6 years ago when she was 11. Okay.
Mm.
She's doing great. She sees
Mm.
both of us all the time. We get together. And again, I know there's different circumstances.
Right.
I'm not, I realize that that's not, uh,
Doesn't always work out that
it
way,
doesn't always work
but
out that way. I completely
but
understand
it's a
that, but
great goal.
I always encourage parents, if it's as much as it's possible, because again, no matter what, even if they seem tough and like, I don't care, you're their parents. That's their little family, you
Mhm.
know? And when that's ruptured, and especially if the parents are sort of bashing each other and all that, it's
Yeah.
really bad. It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And it sounds like, just based on what you've said, your parents been together for a long time. Sounds like uh
60
healthy,
years.
amazing
Yeah.
relationship.
And
My parents as well. And
oh, cool.
you recognize, I mean, well, so not that long because my mom died, but up until the point of her death, yes. But I recognize that that's something I'm incredibly grateful for, right? Because not nowadays there's so much more divorce, and you add the divorce, but then you add all these other problems on top of it. I don't take it for granted. I know that I got a very solid, loving place that I could be my little rebellious teenage girl, and not be afraid of creating some problem between parents. I mean, I think sometimes the kids end up feeling quite powerful because the parents are playing off against each other in a
Yes.
divorce.
Yeah. That's a big thing. And we know this in child psychology. Children feel the safest when the parents' relationship is the most important relationship.
Mm,
You can't, mothers will pull their sons closer, fathers will pull the daughter closer, or vice versa. And you think that's helping them. It's not. Okay. They instinctually know that this is the union I came from. So the stronger that union is, the more calm and relaxed and confident they feel. Again, whether you're together or not. Not easy. Like I said, I
right,
know
right,
there's
right.
crazy circumstances to why people get divorced, and I'm certainly not judging anyone, but I always tell the parents when they hire me, if they're not together, I'll say, "Hey, let's do a parents session." And they'll say, "No, I can't." And listen, do you want your son to get better? You got to try to put that behind you. And whenever they do that, they feel better and their son starts to improve.
Mm. It must be incredibly inspiring to see changes in your work. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It is. I mean, you know, after 12 years now, and I'm hundreds of young guys and families, I get messages about promotions and marriages and babies being born and graduations and all that. It's just great. And I've gotten young guys off as many as 6 different medications, and with working with their
Right, right,
psychiatrist.
right, right.
Again, I'm not a
Very
medical
important.
doctor. I stay in my lane,
Yeah.
but and just guys that maybe felt like college wasn't for them. One of my first clients is here in Marin County locally, and his parents reluctantly allowed him to go into plumbing and electric. He just didn't feel like college was for him.
Mhm.
And I was able to sort of help the parents see and support them. And he's 32 now. He was one of my first clients. He's 32 and has his own business. He's got like 5 employees working under him and just crushing,
That's
And
awesome. I actually saw a post that you put out, I don't know, a few weeks ago around the trades and for parents and for, young adults to seriously consider it. And I think I have heard some of those stories where that's happened, and they feel good. They're providing something of value that's always going to be needed, and making good money.
I have so many of those former clients now, Laura, and the trades, we've seen this thing in college where you get your degree, get a job in an office and you make all the money. And that's the college degrees, as people know, don't have the value or the cachet, if you will,
Right.
that they even had 15, 20 years ago. There was a thing in the news the other day after the election where Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, 2 Ivy League schools, canceled classes the next day because the kids were, and I'm not making any comments about who won or who lost the election, but young people need resilience. You're at university and you can't go to classes because of the
Mhm.
election. So employers know that now. And then the thing about the trades, HVAC, electric, plumbing, welding, those things. There's so many baby boomers that are getting out of those fields and retiring and
Right,
selling businesses, and no one is,
right. There hasn't
there's like a,
exactly.
and so I tell these young guys, even the sons of parents that are affluent, maybe that
Mhm.
they're in the
Mhm.
corporate world, they have advanced degrees, PhDs, masters and stuff. If your son doesn't feel like that's for him, he can make a lot of money in the trades. Those jobs are going to boom for the next
Right,
10 years. And
right.
I have probably, gosh, it's 7 or 8 now young guys that got into apprenticeships right after high school rather than going to college. And they're in varying degrees of either they've gotten through and they're working already and
Mhm.
or still in their apprenticeship
Mhm.
and they see the opportunity ahead of them.
Right. Well,
So
it's interesting too because it's a tangible thing that they're contributing, which I think sometimes at the I mean I just think about one of my kids, super creative. It's a little bit harder to have a tangible outcome. I mean, you can be creating forever, whether it's music, whether it's writing. It's kind of like it never really is complete, and so it can sometimes get a little bit paralyzing if you have that much. Open-endedness, not knowing what do I do in order to what do I do in order to exchange for having some revenue coming in, right? Because that is
yeah.
a part of it. Um, so for anyone listening that is curious, whether they have a younger son or maybe know of someone, what would you want them to hear from the standpoint of how hopeful are you for our our young our young men moving forward?
I'm very hopeful. Um, and what I would say to any parent out there, or grandparent, or aunt, or uncle, boys learn by doing. Girls do too, but boys even more. They have to be shown, like I said, they're more physical. They have a
Yeah.
shorter attention span. They
Mhm.
mature slower. So, again, I'm not saying anything negative about psychiatry or psychology or the weekly therapy session. What I am saying is that my process and approach, where I meet with them for a Zoom session, like kind of like what you and I are doing now, which they
Mhm.
prefer. Mom and dad don't have to drive them anywhere. It's like,
Right,
boop, there I am on, and they're so acclimated to screens now anyway.
right,
But the real game changer is I'm giving them 2 actions to take that week. I'm telling them, dude, you got to cut down on screens. That's a huge thing now. Screen addiction is as bad as weed, alcohol,
mm,
anything. Um,
mm,
and we know this. Again, Jonathan Haidt, my colleague who has the bestseller out, The Anxious Generation, we know this now. Their executive function, the prefrontal cortex, it just atrophies that when they're on screens with all that all day long. So um, I'm giving him things to do that week. And then, as I said, mom and dad and him have phone call and text support. So I know
okay,
what's going on in real time. So you're
okay,
dealing with breakdowns. So many parents say, okay, he goes to his weekly session, but then for the next 7 days minus an hour, we have no contact with this therapist or this
right,
psychiatrist.
right, right,
So and then what happens is the young man, his sessions are usually just a recap of the last week.
right,
You're not
right.
getting anything done. Where with me, we're dealing with stuff right
So
in the present.
action. What I hear is there is a lot more action in your approach. Would you say that's accurate?
100%.
Okay.
And to explain that to your audience, and this is true for adults too, but especially again for young people whose brains are still developing. You can have intellectual awarenesses, light bulb moments. They're like, wow,
Mhm.
I get it. You can
Yeah.
have heartfelt emotional connections and you're dealing with your trauma, your pain and all that. But if you don't take actions based on those new awarenesses, nothing changes.
Yeah.
I- Information and awareness is not enough. It's like, okay, great, I know this. How do I change things? How do
Right,
I stop vaping? How do I limit my screen time?
right.
A lot of the young guys, I get them to agree to turn in their smartphone and just go to a flip phone for a while.
Oh,
It's, oh
wow.
God,
Okay.
yeah, the addiction is
Yeah.
that bad. I have clients that have done that and it's changed their whole life.
Yeah.
I had a kid, he's in the book, my new book
Mhm.
that's out, Take Back Control, which is kind of what parents are like hoping they can do to take back control of their son's
Right,
trajectory. But
right.
he's in the book. When I met him, he was on medication. He was isolating in his room. He was failing to launch, after high school. And the parents were so upset. They thought, he's driving us crazy. We're going to have to kick him out. And he may have to live in his car. Well, a year and a half later now, he's still on his flip phone. He has a truck. He has a great career. He moved out of the house. He's so
Mm.
confident. He's literally like a different person. I'm
Wow.
serious because the screens and the how it just made him kind of foggy and everything. You
Right.
really see that with some of the boys, where
That's
the
it's
screen
it's
addiction changes it as soon as it stops.
it's interesting just because I have my own experience, obviously in a different generation than those kids, but I lived for a while in France, and at that time it was just, I don't know, it was just easier, simpler to have one of those flip phones. And it wasn't as easy. I mean, now you can now you can go anywhere and you can use your phone really easily. But I had that, and it really cuts down on everything. I mean, it was the kind of phone where you had to hit it 3 times to get the letter C on a text message, you know.
Right.
It was, and I realized I felt a difference. So I'm just saying that for someone who is not on my phone, like probably nothing like this generation that you're talking about, but I could notice a difference. And I felt really much more present in what was happening. And I also made different decisions about what to do and not to do because it made it harder to do certain things. And so you would think about, well, maybe I'll do that later, or I'll not, or I'll choose not to. So I mean, that's amazing that a kid, I mean, I'm just thinking, it's amazing that a kid said they would try that.
Well, yeah, and that's what parents have to do. Because a lot of times when parents reach out to me, they say, "Well, I'm not sure our son will do it. I don't know if
Right.
he'll show up." And then I say, "Well, you need to take back control." That again, the title of my new
Right.
book. Because and you know the thing in business where it's like fail quickly, just
Right.
keep
Yeah.
iterating and fail
Yeah.
quickly because that's
Yeah.
it. It's the same thing with these teen boys. It's like you have to get them to get up against their stuff and really draw the line as quickly as possible. It's so many parents that hire me to help their struggling to launch, failing to launch son who's now in his early 20s. He's done summer all of college. He's still living at home. He's in the base. You get it.
Right.
They always say to me, "We wish we had done this years ago. We wish we had
Mm.
done this when he was a teenager," but they were scared. And I always tell them, you have to lay down the line. You have to say,
Yeah.
listen, we love you, but we're not going to fail in our job as your parents. Okay. You're going to either do it this way or you're out of here. Okay.
Mm.
And, that's after high school, obviously. But
Oh,
even
you mean
when
you can't kick them out when they're 11 or 12?
you can't kick a 15-year-old old out, but even that, you've got to get back control.
Right.
Because however your son is going to sort of rebel and freak out and what parents are terrified of, that's not going to change. The longer you kick the can down the road and let that go, where the son is in control of the household, he's raging or isolating or all that, the parents are not in agreement, that dynamic only gets worse over time.
Mm.
Parents think, oh, well, when he gets older, when he goes off to college, it does happen sometimes, but rarely.
Mm. Mm. Um, what do you think is the paint a picture for me, for the audience, of what you see could be possible, let's say 20 years down the road. So either for new, like the younger, much younger generation coming up behind the generation that you're currently working with, or what you see as possible for this generation you're working with 20 years down the road, paying attention to some of the things that you offer. What's the upside?
Gosh, again, big question, but
I
what
know.
comes to mind for me is that within the culture, within the media, within politics, where people kind of want to get their way and sort of get people on their side or whatever for all their agendas, which I completely stay out of. Okay, I work with all sorts of families and I don't get into that. But that said, I feel what's possible and what we need to do is maybe don't don't sort of get into that with kids, especially in high school and maybe even in college, and just let them sort of develop and realize that we're all on the same team here. We as parents want to help you guys to sort of get your bearings, get your confidence, be able to launch out successfully into young adulthood. Um, and and uh, and seeing how maybe the mistakes we made, for instance, giving them smartphones, letting them be on screens all the time, letting them be on social media. I think as parents in our generation, the Gen X's, and older or younger,
Mhm.
just to realize that yeah, we did make mistakes, and this is what we have to do
Mhm.
to help them going forward.
Mhm.
Because again, for me, what I've seen is it always goes back to excessive habits and addictive behaviors.
Mhm.
And we all have to have that discipline. You know that. It's like
Right.
get up and go to school,
Right.
exercise, eat right, get your sleep.
Right.
Don't be get whether you're 15 or 60, we all
Yeah.
have to do that. And technology, I think we sort of thought that that would kind of, maybe eliminate the need for that stuff. And we realized that it's not true at all.
As you were saying that, what popped into my mind was just having really incredibly healthy habits around anything, right? So whether it's something physical, emotional, energetic, spiritual, it's creating and being very mindful. And I'm just saying this out loud because there was something you said that just it popped into my mind, being very, very mindful of how we are making decisions, how we are choosing this relationship or the other, how we are choosing a career or a college path. And there's a discipline in that maybe there's some room for improvement. For all of us. I'm not just saying, I'm just not saying just the young kids, but just something about the way you said that, you know?
100%. And it's obviously, we have an obesity epidemic in this country. Okay. So, and we need to look at that. And there's fundamentals and discipline that we all have to have, like we said, eating right, exercising, getting your sleep, having something that you're working towards. I think young guys should play a sport, watching those, your social media, your video games, your vaping, your weed, all that stuff. You have to look at that. There's no escape. And then I think all of us have fallen into this. Oh, well, there's AI. Oh, well, there's Chat GBT. Oh, well, it can write my stuff for me. It can do that. There's robotics coming in. It's like that. We're still people. We're still flesh and blood
Yeah.
human beings, no matter how much technology evolves and things can make our life easier. We still, I feel, really have to relate to each other and that in-person connecting. One of the things that's really hurt young people, boys a little bit more, is this isolation
Right.
on screens.
Yeah.
Boys play these video games where they'll play for hours at a time, and they're these, I don't even know like a lot about them because I don't play them, but they're online competing against
Oh
each other
yeah.
and all that. And it's like you need to be in person, going to the gym, running around, riding your bike, skateboarding at it, like with live people. It's so important. And I think we just have to be so aware of that going forward as things evolve. Elon Musk a few weeks ago, he had that whole thing where he debuted his driverless car and the little taxi bus and the robots and
Mhm.
everything. I think going forward it's going to be so important for us to keep that sort of organic human flesh and blood part of us that needs human connection,
Yeah.
especially for young people whose brains are developing and how they're seeing the world and their place in it.
Yeah, and I think that with all of the advancements, the technological advancements, it's in a way we're being we're being given an incredible opportunity because there are some things that can be time saved. There are some ways that it can help us, but we're giving this incredible opportunity to, well, it might feel like a burden at times, but who are we as human beings, right? Like it comes down to that because now we don't have to be as busy, meaning maybe, working out on a farm all day long, right? And being so tired that you pretty much eat and can go to sleep. We're not in that type of an environment now. So we have more time and space. So then what are we going to do with it? And maybe that we have all this time and space, maybe we've been, I'm just saying we as humanity, right? Maybe flailing a little bit in these last X number of years. And now we're recognizing that and there's an opportunity there, but there hasn't been much attention toward it. The whole thing about connecting human to human. Who am I as a human? How do I connect with this other human being in this physical space? I think we have more time and space to think about it than we used to, or to address it. What do you
Yeah,
think?
and of course, and we have to because they know now that children don't go out and play as much as they used to. I
Mm.
mean, when I was a kid,
Oh
we'd be
God.
just,
Oh my
when I was a
God.
teenager, we'd be gone on our bike.
Gone.
My mother would like, come home. It's like, yelling. And we'd be just out going crazy,
Lots of
playing
adventures.
stickball, exploring, riding
Yeah.
our bikes, going,
Yeah.
and kids now are stuck inside
Yeah.
and they're like house cats and it's not good. It's really not. And then they wonder, parents wonder why, like I said, they're struggling to launch into young adulthood. And I know things are different. I hate when people go, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And when I was your age, 30, 40 years ago, when we were teenagers, or when I was a teenager, it was much different. The economy was different. It's a lot harder for them to launch
Right.
out onto their own and
Oh yeah.
get their own place and all that. And I understand that. But we also have to realize that, again, the digital world and everything, um, they got to get out in the
Yeah.
sunlight, in the fresh air, running around
With other people.
with other people off their screens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so
Yeah.
many of the young guys that I work with, one of their first assignments is usually all the time is you got to start to cut down on your screens and you got to start to exercise. And they're like, what do you mean? I say, okay, the first week, here's your action. I want you to do an hour less on screens because some of them are on screens literally for 6, 7 hours a day, 8 hours. It's
Mm.
nuts.
Oh, because now a lot of schools let kids bring are they allowed to have phones in high schools now?
They are. One of the things that Jonathan Haidt, my colleague who wrote The Anxious Generation that's out now, is he's pushing for, and he spoke before Congress, I'm pretty sure, is phone-free schools.
Oh,
Because the
wow.
kids are in class, and my daughter's high school, I'm pointing to it, it's right that way. Uh, they have to put their, in one of those kind of like pouch things when they walk into the classroom.
Okay.
Um, but a lot of schools aren't like that. And the
Yeah.
kid's got his phone under the desk, and
Yeah,
it's
well, that was the
really
thing that
bad.
I noticed because my two younger kids went to Montessori school and there were really clear guidelines around just if kids even had a phone, because a lot of them didn't, then they couldn't have them in the classroom. They gave them up until after school was over.
Yeah.
And then they went to the high school and it was almost like it was everyone was on their phone. Like no one was in class without a phone. I'm
It's,
thinking, wait a minute. So what are you doing in class? What's happening in class?
oh
But
yeah.
so if someone's listening and they wonder, well, what's the next step? Can you share a little bit about your book and or how people can reach you?
They can reach me. I post almost every day on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter X, at Tom Bresnahan. You just type in Tom Bresnahan. I'm the
And
only
you
one.
do, and you do
Yeah.
post every day.
Pretty much.
You do.
I just feel so passionate about it. And
Right.
there's so many things and so many angles to look at it. Um, they can download my new book for free.
Okay.
And the thing that I talk about in the book is it's called Take Back Control, the 5 steps that parents need to take to figure this out. Because again, so many of them are worried about their son and whether he's in high school or post high school. You know, What trajectory is he on? Is he, by the time he's 25, like one of the things I always say with the young guys, where do you want to be at 25? And let's reverse engineer it.
Right.
I've said this to probably 300 young guys. When you're 25, would you like to have a cool job that you love, making good money with room for growth? Have a cool apartment, maybe with roommates, have a cool car, and have a cute girlfriend and do fun stuff on the weekends? I've never had anyone say no,
They know.
right? So my job is to reverse engineer that.
Yeah.
And again, I know what to do with the young man, but I have to sort of get their parents to buy in and say, you guys got to look at what you're doing too. You got to look at your fighting, your formative experiences from your childhoods, how you two differ, and then the things that, I tell them, first of all, the five things that they need to do. And again, it's all outlined in the book, but you got to start telling the truth about what's really going on with your son, with your relationship, with the household, with his siblings, with your stress level, with your worry
Mm,
about it. You
mm,
got to get honest. And I got to fix this. We've got to do something different.
right.
You've got to commit to being a united front with your co-parent.
Yeah.
Again, I
Big
know
one.
that's not
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
especially if you're divorced, but
Yeah.
as much as you can, because what young kids will do, and you know this, you're a mother, whether it's boys or girls, they will live in the gap. They will play the gap. It's like
Oh,
divide
yeah.
and conquer and play
Yeah.
them off each other. And then my own daughter does it sometimes, and she's
Right.
really high functioning, doing great.
Right.
Um, you've got to agree. Number three, you've got to agree on and set boundaries and consequences. What I tell parents all the time is, you know who I am? I'm the police officer, the school administrator, the coach, the father of the girl he's dating. I'm all the people that he's going to meet in his life when he gets
Mm,
out of the little cocoon you have him in.
right.
Okay.
Right.
So if you don't start to give him age appropriate consequences and boundaries, trust me, the world will set them really quickly. Suspensions, expulsions, jail.
Right.
I've had a
Right.
lot of clients like that. The fifth thing is, I'm sorry, the fourth thing, you got to have respectful communication. You
Hmm.
can't be yelling and screaming at him or yelling and screaming at each other and then expect him to not yell and scream back. Again, we
Right.
all make mistakes.
Right.
My ex-wife and I argue sometimes. We bicker. My daughter sees it, and then I'm like, fuck, well, there's no yelling or screaming,
But
but
the good news is you can actually,
yeah.
if you
So
go with the honest and transparent, you can say, oh, you know what, like I recognize I did this. I am in this moment, I am regrouping, and that's something that they can learn from too. We're not perfect.
Exactly. I tell parents all the time, look, I've made every mistake in the book. Let me help you. Like Jerry Maguire and Tom Cruise movie with Cuba Gooding. Help me help
Help
you.
you.
It's like, and then the fifth thing is, and this is really important for everyone in the family because a big part of my training is in family systems therapy and
Okay.
behavioral psychology.
Hmm.
And so you have to look at the underlying issues and the trauma. And people right away go, oh, trauma, come on.
Right.
It's like
Right.
trauma can be a little thing like
Um,
a boy being rejected by a girl. And
right.
then he
Right.
feels like, I'm never going to risk that,
Right.
that rejection and that pain. And then he gets into porn and becomes addicted. The
Right.
parents have to look at their formative experiences, really look, because it's when the young man is acting out, whether he's, defiant, argumentative, weed, vaping, porn, going crazy, bad grades or whatever, there's usually something underneath it. There's usually
Right.
something that it's my job to be detective and go,
Mm,
what happened? What
right.
happened there? And shine light on that and help the parents see that as well. Because the
Yeah.
parents, as you know, they will visit their own wounds and their unconscious
Right.
traumas onto the son
Right.
or daughter without even being aware of it. I always say, and this is more for child psychology, but I always remind parents with young children, you don't have to say anything. If you're feeling it, they're
Oh
downloading.
yeah.
It. And
100%.
so
Yeah.
if you're completely stressed out and worrying, they're feeling all that. And
Yeah.
so when I help parents see that and show them how we're going to heal as a family, that's when they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, okay, and they jump on board.
It's interesting. I so agree with what you just said about the kids. They already know. No words are needed. They already know, right? So that's a big thing when I'm working with people and anything comes up. I'm usually coaching around around career and life change, but obviously most of the people I work with are parents, so things do come up from time to time. And I'm like, you think you're fooling your kids? Like everything that you're saying to try to present a certain way, they already know. They already know the truth because they're watching and they're feeling it in that moment. The
Oh,
other thing,
100%. And you know this, teenagers will, they want to call out hypocrisy. They
oh
do.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, even my teenager was like, whatever, dad, Mr. Therapist. And I'm like, hey,
yeah,
but then I have to let her, mess with me too.
right.
It's like that improvisation. You can't,
Mhm.
the three parenting
Mhm.
styles. There's the permissive on one end, there's the authoritative on the other end, and then there's authoritarian, and then in the middle is that authoritative, where you're
Yeah,
in this improvisation. You're letting them be snotty and sassy sometimes, but then you're setting, that's how they're learning. And so
right,
many parents fall into one or the other category, the extreme, and that
right.
never works.
Yeah, you did some posts recently on that. It was really helpful outlining it for people to take a look at it and to be able to see themselves in that. Really helpful stuff for anyone who wants to know more on Tom's social media. Brings out a lot. Can you say a little bit about those five areas that you just talked about, or five in, actions, I guess?
Yeah.
Those are the core of the book. Your current
Yes, they're the
that
core,
book.
but
Okay.
I talk about all sorts of other
Okay.
things in the book. One of the things I think for any parents in the audience is that you have to remember, and it's not easy, and this goes back to the permissive parenting style. Your job is to be their parent, not their friend. Okay. In other words, my teen, I love her more than anything in the world. I'd step in front of a bullet for her. But
Mhm.
my job is to be her father first, not her friend. Okay. That doesn't mean we don't goof around and have
Right.
fun and laugh
Right.
and all that
Right.
stuff. But that's my job. And I think so many parents, they don't know how to find that sweet spot where they're leading, they're setting boundaries, they're giving consequences, they're telling them, look, I'm not going to fail at my job as your parent, okay? You're not going, I'm not going to let this fly. And that's something that I really help them with. And I talk about that in the book.
Hmm. I love that. It's something I mean, I say my kids have taught me so much, right? Like yes, I've gone to school, I'm educated, I have had lots of different experiences, but my kids have taught me so much. And one of the things that I feel that relates to what you're talking about that's been really a big learning, and it took a little while. It took a few of them having some challenges, but that their journey is it's their journey, right? Like their life. That doesn't mean that I'm disengaged as a parent. It means that it's not my journey. It's not the journey I want for them. It's their journey. And so then back to being a parent, right? Rather than a friend. If you're a parent, you recognize that they're on their journey. It's going to be different than yours. They're living in a different era. You're a different person, all the differences. And and so what does it mean to lead with the ultimate goal of them being able to fully live their life? And that's doesn't get talked about very much in the from a parenting standpoint. I don't think. Do you?
No, I don't. And I think that's a great point. And what I am always striving for in my relationship with my daughter is, as you said, it's not, we're doing all the college applications now and what her major is going to be. And I'm not agreeing on all the thing, but it's her life,
Right,
and I just
right,
have to be the guide, if you will,
right,
or even the coach. Even
right,
though she's
right,
my
right,
daughter, it's like
right,
just kind of, well, hey, give her this perspective and that perspective, but ultimately, where it's appropriate, let her make those decisions. She's gonna
right.
have her successes and failures and learn that way. And but the overarching thing I know for me, and I think for all parents, is it's the discipline, it's the fundamentals, it's those foundational skills. Again, like so many kids today, make your bed, learn how to cook, put the dishes in the dishwasher. Don't just plop them in the sink. Kids don't have so many of the basic skills. Me, again, being the oldest of five, And my youngest sister, same parents, is 15 years younger than me.
Right. Very
So when
different.
I was 17, I was like changing her and bathing her and feeding
Right.
her and
Right.
doing laundry and everything. It's like those were amazing skills for me. When
Right.
I got to college, I was like, this is easy. I just have to do my laundry and go to the cafeteria, and
Right.
it was like vacation. And you see this with kids, they're terrified to go off to school, and they have all these centers for where they can go and get support. Again, not saying that that's not a good thing, but we have to really, I think as a
I think you're
society,
highlighting the resilience piece,
the
right? Yeah.
resilience, the structure, the fundamentals, the full scope. It's not enough to be boys and girls too. You got to know how to cook, clean, make your bed, stay in shape. You got to know all those fundamental skills.
Right.
It's not just about, oh, well, I'm good on the computer and I'm going to go to college and I'm going to make all this money. Okay, great. But I think you need to be well-rounded in all areas.
Right. That's one of the things I really appreciated about the Montessori school. It was a
Yeah.
very, very well-rounded approach. Anything else that you would like to share with the audience? Anything I didn't ask you about that you want them to know either about you, your work, or just about what opportunities there are for the younger generations?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I guess the only thing I would say is that, um, just to bring it back full circle from when we started, young men are falling behind at alarming levels. Again, their college enrollment now is two-thirds girls, one-third boys. And then if you look at graduation rates, because more boys drop out, it's two girls for every boy. Again, we know girls don't marry down. Am I saying I wouldn't want my daughter to marry a electrician? No, but that typically is not what happens. In the workforce, again, the Gen Zs 22 to 27, it's more two-thirds girls, one-third boys. And then family formation, so many young women, to go back to that Morgan Stanley study that I cited at the beginning of our talk, there's not enough economically viable and emotionally viable young men for women to pair off with. So I really think it's going to affect us
Mm.
individually and collectively as a culture. So I think parents, grandparents need to know that if you have a son, a grandson, a nephew in your life and he's struggling, get help now. Whether it's with me or someone else, get help now because it's
Mm.
not something that's going to go away or they're going to grow out of because there's not really that support in the culture. Again, for them to
Right.
focus on the fundamentals and all those things that we talked about. It's just sort of more of kind of he'll be fine and
Right.
don't worry about it. Parents have to take control and realize, is my son on that trajectory by the time he hits his mid to late 20s that he's going to be out on his own functioning? And if you think he's not, don't kick the can down the road. Don't think that
Right.
going off to school or he'll mature out of it, because that usually doesn't happen.
Hmm. Okay. So to take action now.
Take
Take
action
action
now.
now.
Again, it's
Take
like
back
that.
control now.
It's like that fail fast. They
Yeah.
usually don't grow out of it. And again, the excessive habits and addictive behaviors, that's, I mean, you see it in the culture. The gambling now,
Mm.
which I think is just crazy that it's illegal. And they target young boys with all these like gambling sites and bet on this and bet on that. It's just
I
really
don't even know about that.
crazy. I
Uh,
think
huh.
I don't. There's
So,
way too much for them to get into.
right. And what's the easiest way that someone can get your book, your new
Like I
book?
said, I post every day on LinkedIn,
Okay.
Facebook, and Twitter, X. It's right. You just click
Okay.
the link in my bio. You can download the book, and jump on a call with me if you feel like your son uh, needs help. If you want to get him help, if you want to get the right help,
Mm.
it's something that I've found over these last 12 years where, as I said, the weekly 50-minute talk doesn't work. He's got to make the intellectual connections, the emotional connections, and then take the actions and be
Actions.
monitored and be held accountable by mom and dad and me. That's when you
Mhm.
see the biggest jumps where they really just the parents are like, oh my God, we got our son back. He's finally where we knew he could be.
Mm,
That's how it
that's a
happened.
gift. Well, I respect the work you're doing so much in the world, and obviously your clients are very fortunate to have you, and it's really wonderful to know about the work you're doing in the world. So thank you so much for coming on the show and having a conversation about this with me, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.